Well, I am so delighted to be over here with my dear, dear friend, Todd Palmer. Todd has actually been my longest coaching client. We've been together for 7 years. It has been the joy of joy to serve Todd. Um, it is being magical in that I have learned as much as I believe Todd has learned in this coaching relationship. So we're here to share, what the experience of this coaching relationship has been like over the years. And also that there's a certain culmination of this experience where Todd is just about, I believe, next week to launch his book From Suck to Success. So it's an extraordinary book as well that captures many elements that we're going to touch on today. It'll be available on Amazon. I really encourage each of you listening to pick up the book and be inspired from it. So From Suck to Success, and so Todd, I welcome wherever you would like to begin. I welcome you to sharing with our community listening over here.
Yeah, so it's amazing to think where the human being I was 7 years ago when we started. So where do I want to start from is appreciation and gratitude first and foremost for you, for our relationship. Um, Thank you. I appreciate you talking about my book From Suck to Success. It's a guide to extraordinary entrepreneurship. It comes out on February 9th. And for fans of yours, for people who believe in the work that you provide, I want to let people know that Danny it was generous enough to write the foreword for my book, and he's at the beginning of my book. He's also at the conclusion of my book, and I talk a lot about our coaching relationship, how I pivoted from being an active CEO to now being a full-time coach, to how by practicing things like the active learning cycle that's allowed us to stay in relationship for 7 years. And for anybody who's worked with you, this is not going to be breaking news, but for people who are just getting introduced to you, I think people need to understand that a coaching relationship is one based on trust, and it's an intimate connecting relationship. And I know I've shared things with you as my coach that I've never shared with anyone else. I have clients who share things with me that they don't share with anyone else because we create the safe space. And it's really been nothing short of transformative for me to have worked with you, and for the different times and the different stages of my life and the stages of my maturation, the stages of my development, the stages of my transformation, and how every step of the way you've been there with me, every step of the way for the last 7 years, from our biggest project in the beginning, and certainly our most worthwhile project in my life, was helping me reconnect with my son Tyler, to growing my business, to exiting my business, to starting my coaching practice, and all the stages of my life in between, to know that I have the guide of my hero's journey. I'm the Frodo to my Gandalf, someone to help me get through the woods of fear, insecurity, and self-doubt, when maybe to the outside world I didn't look like I had it. It's truly been one of the greatest relationship of my life, and I absolutely thank you for the time and that you've invested in me.
Yeah, so it's, um, there's a philosophy of coaching that, um, and my philosophy of coaching is I'm only as successful a coach as I can invest someone in the ability to self-coach themselves. And then you appreciate that success as a coach when somebody not only claims mastery to enable them to self-coach themselves, but they develop mastery to enable others to self-coach themselves. And what I have witnessed in your ability to do both those things, your ability over the years to self-coach yourself. I'm holding a container for you to actually do extraordinary self-coaching, and then to watch you blossom into this leader, this conscious leader who's now written this book, who's now engaged in a practice that is invested in the same philosophy to help people self-coach themselves. And then it's a fractal, because now you build capacity from the bottom up. So in essence, people might be curious, why 7 years? Because the philosophy is every touch point of coaching releases any dependency on coaching, because it's a self-coaching model. So every touch point of coaching releases the dependency on the need for coaching. And so what remains is just, the only reason to be in coaching is choice.
Without a doubt.
We just choose to be in it because of the richness of relationship and the richness of the learning journey.
Well, I think so much of what you said is really so applicable today too, because for me, you're someone that is who's first and foremost, after 7 years, I feel like you know me pretty well, and that's those rich relationships that sometimes we have a hard time creating. And I know for me specifically, the story I used to tell myself as a man in my 40s and going into my 50s, it's hard to make new friends. It's hard to have those trusting relationships. Then when we apply I came to you originally for business coaching or a little bit of life coaching. And the first question you really drilled on to me was, so yeah, I can help you with all that, but what's your biggest challenge in life? What do you really want to improve upon? And I talked about the relationship with my son and how there wasn't a relationship at that point. And being a single dad, I felt I had really invested in that relationship with him. And I still remember to this day, and I always had this image of you. When I told you about the most challenging part of my life, not my business life or my leadership challenges, but my life, you got excited. You said, I can help you with that. Like that was, I'm like, oh my gosh, because I never knew that there was someone like you who could help me. I've never met anybody until I had met you at the Gathering of Titans, that there was a practitioner of sorts who worked on this life by design model, this life as a curriculum model, with so many people in the coaching space teaching process, which is great. Process is needed for business. I teach process to my clients. But to go in and look at that work-life integration where the entrepreneur goes, whether it's at home or at the office or wherever now we work from, that's where we are. And things are going to happen to us that impact our decisions, and it impact our choices and impact our energies. And you have this, when the demands exceed the resources, then what do you do? And to come to you over the years and share some of my biggest pains, my biggest successes. Again, I always tell the story to people about how did I decide to get into coaching. I said, well, I remember I gave this speech and I called my coach afterwards, and 45 minutes later, he still hadn't said anything other than hello, because I was so excited about the impact I can make on the audience. He said, pay attention to this energy. If it gives you energy, this is where you should be. Yeah. And I had this whole list here in my office of all my Dannyisms, of all the things that over the years that I've learned through from you. And so from my perspective, I anticipate for the rest of my life I'll have a coach, because my life as a curriculum will never end. The classroom never shuts down. So I look at it as that while I've gotten a whole lot better at self-coaching, and I love it when my clients say, hey, I approach this problem, I use some of the tools we've worked on, and I solved it, and I didn't need to reach out to you. It makes me feel very, very proud for their success. But recognizing and realizing it as we age, as we change, as our careers shift, as our families shift, whether it's empty nest or whether it's retirement, we are ever evolving. So the fact that the curriculum never will change, the fact that for me, at least, either coaching or being coached is a lifelong commitment in myself, an investment in myself.
Beautifully said. So I'm wondering, Todd, if we should mention the framework that we've been working with, the meta frame we've been working with in the coaching. It's actually in the forward of the book.
Yeah, the active learning cycle. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's share about that, and then to give some form to, I think this framework will give some form to the various parts of the journey that we've been on, and hopefully will serve you in imagining what it might like for you to engage in a coaching relationship with Todd, if you're inspired to do so after reading his book. So,
and I think that's a really great place to start, because to work with a coach is, you've got to have chemistry, you've got to have connection. But you, as I found, at least for me as the person being coached, I've got to be ready, and I've got to be ready to receive sometimes, tough feedback, tough challenges to old, outdated perceptions. And for me, it always begins with, again, you outline it here beautifully in the active learning cycle around what is my purpose, what is my content, what is my experience.
Beautiful. Okay. So this meta skill is a meta skill for self-coaching. And it's based on the work of Kolb and experiential learning, which we've cited in the book. And so there are 3 phases of the active learning cycle. The first phase is content and or experience. And while that is necessary for change, it's insufficient for change alone.
Correct, for sure.
So part of investing in a relationship, in a coaching relationship, is to understand that we don't get change through content experience alone. Again, the evidence is history repeats itself, but it's the high quality reflection that leads into insightful action, or insightful inspired action that leads to new experiences. And really the coaching relationship is framed around taking experiences, whether they're actually victories, success, because you can always learn more from the successes you're having, or the suck, right? The sucky experience.
For sure.
Where we reflect on what is it that we're here to learn and what actions do we want to take.
So can we talk about the reflection piece for a second? Because I know when I first engaged you, that was new for me.
Yes.
That reflection piece was so powerful, because I certainly was looking at it through my lens. And and I would repeat back to you, here's kind of how I see it. And you would take me to a different place through your experience, through your tactfulness, and through your competency to see it maybe through a different lens, or to see it to question it with massive curiosity. I think for a long time before I started working with you, I had a very fixed mindset around right and wrong, around good or bad, And when I started working with you, instead of seeing everything in a black and white color spectrum, I spent a lot more time in the different shades of gray. And I do that at least for the way I do it in my work with you is in that reflection stage.
Yeah. So starting to thread all of that together, there's an attitude of reflection, or qualities of reflection, and then there are the form of the questions. So let me unpack, first of all, both of those elements. So the attitude of reflection, first of all, it begins with an attitude of ownership. It's to actually say, instead of moving out of this victim mindset, it's moving into an ownership mindset. It's saying, I own this. I own this experience. And then it's moving into an attitude of openness, kindness, because ultimately it's meeting the reality where it's at. And then there's an ability to actually move into kindness for oneself and others. And then there's the insatiable curiosity and the presence, and then connecting all of that to ultimately what we do at the beginning of our coaching sessions. It's what's your purpose for being here? Because that's ultimately going to frame the content and experience that we're going to want to focus on. So, and then when you move into the form of the question, some questions, the default part of our brain, which is safety first, goes into default, which is what if every catastrophe that could happen, right?
Yes.
Why? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with other
Right.
people? That's where our brain tends to go. So we're looking at the different between the forms of questions that take you into a stream of depreciation versus a stream of appreciation.
Correct. Sure.
So an example is after I got my diagnosis of terminal brain cancer, my brain was going into, why me?
Sure.
What if every catastrophe can happen? But I was trying to find a generative question, which is what matters most now?
Right.
What matters most now? And so that's an example of, a powerful question that leads you into a stream of appreciation. And there's an infinite number of questions you could ask in that stream. And sometimes the most powerful question you could ask is, what's the most powerful question I could ask right now?
Right, for sure.
So that question leads to action, which then leads to new experiences. Now, when you understand the cycle and you understand that it's not a closed loop, but really if you turn it on its side, it's really a spiral of ongoing learning and growth. So it's experience, reflection, action, experience, reflection, action, experience, reflection, action. And that is the ongoing spiral of learning and growth and transformation. And when you understand that, a few insights emerge from that, which is you understand that the curriculum's never on the slide deck. The curriculums are what's on deck. Life is the curriculum.
Yes.
And it's an infinite curriculum.
And it's that was one of the biggest struggles I had. Because we're going to we engage. I'm thinking this is a year engagement, what have you. And I found that the more I did it, the more I got attracted to it, the more I got into that loop, and I was, throwing new things into the spiral and into the active learning cycle. It was really surprising that whatever challenge I faced, whether it was an employee problem, a client problem, a family problem, if I dropped it into that process, or even, some of my biggest challenges, and I talk about it in the book, is, my itty bitty shitty committee, how I talk to myself. I drop it into that loop if I'm disciplined to the process, but not so disciplined that I don't leave space to breathe, and I don't practice self-compassion. And because we used to talk a lot about, don't let it go. Don't squeeze so hard. Don't try and don't muscle your way through it.
Yeah.
More of a whip action versus a squeeze action. Then that's where those breakthrough moments. And then I remember that one of the greatest gifts you ever gave me is think about it and let it sit. Yes. Let the subconscious do its work. And I had never heard that before I'd met you. Yeah. And that has served me. I've gotten a lot better sleep. It has served me so much better in all of my relationships, primarily my relationship with myself. Yes. And it was something that I'd never considered, because I think, especially when you're an entrepreneur, at least for me, I was very self-reliant and I was very hard driving at a point in my life. And I just figured if I just worked harder, worked more, pressed harder, pushed more good would come. And the reality was I had to let some of that breathe. And that's one of the greatest gifts I got from you, is just to let that subconscious do its work, let it go for a while, and it will come back to you. And for me, usually it comes back to me, when people say I'm driving out of the road by myself and something will happen, or I'm in the shower, or I'm at the gym, it will surface back up.
Yes. And the beautiful thing about this active learning cycle is sometimes we think we need to have everything well thought through before we take action.
And so I'm guilty of that. Yes.
Yeah. So what's beautiful about this is, because you trust that you're in a spiral, you can actually go into reflection, and there's a rhythm of reflection. When you're in a coaching relationship, oftentimes we're coaching, we've been coaching every 2 weeks on a cycle.
Correct.
And so that's kind of like putting space in the calendar for that formal reflection. But there are, for example, in Entrepreneur's organization, there is the 10-10-10
Yeah, from Warren Rustand. Yeah.
Yeah, from Warren Rustand, which maps beautifully. It's an active learning cycle where you actually wake up, thinking about what is my purpose for the day. And then your first 10 minutes, based on the purpose of the day, is ideally reading for 10 minutes, something inspiring that then you go into a meditation reflection on, and then you journal, ultimately, ideally putting in an action, which by the end of the day leads to a reflection on the experience that brought you, right? So that's building an example of a rhythm into your day that includes the space for the active learning cycle, and particularly the reflection. Because what we do is we're very good at doing content and doing action. But unless we build into our day reflection into the calendar, both, pausing throughout the day, at the beginning, at the end, and with a certain rhythm in between, then we lose the opportunity for optimizing our growth.
Well, and I think for me anyways, the limitation was by not doing the reflection, I wasn't owning things.
Yes.
I was not having self-awareness. I was not creating self-accountability. And it does put us into the victim mode, or even a martyr mode, and something in that space. And I find now with the coaching that I do with my clients is, once they get that reflection part, that's where a lot of the magic happens. Because then when they have ownership versus me, think this is something again, I know you talked recently about, is something not happening to me, but happening for me.
Yes.
And if it happens for me, I approach it so much differently.
Yes. Yes. And I so and to add, to loop back to where I was going originally, because you're in this active learning cycle, part of coaching isn't only to come up with the big strategic steps of action. It's also, there's tremendous value in identifying the smallest possible next step you can take. And that may have more value because what you do by identifying the smallest action you can take, it puts you into a loop of feedback.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It puts you into a loop of feedback where you can begin to trust. And oftentimes in that loop, by taking a small step, synchronicities appear that allow you to understand that you're on the right track. So that's where the magic happens. And also there's this experience, you put yourself into a feedback loop where you can begin to feel into, how do you know you're on the right track? Well, one of the ways is to actually follow your energy. Does this seem to contract your energy, or does this lead to a feeling of energy expansion? Does this energize you? So for example, when you were thinking of transitioning from your business into coaching, I had you track where did you feel most alive?
Right. And it was so a couple of things I remember doing is, I certainly did some speaking and I felt super alive. And I started volunteering my time a lot with going back to EO. There's a group called accelerators. There are people who want to get into EO who maybe don't meet some of the criteria. So those of us who are in the group volunteer our time back to assist and coach them and lay out a different program. And I remember working with a group. There were 6 people in the group. Through the year we spent together, 4 of them, up leveled, up skilled into being an EO company. And take a look at statistically, only about 4.5% of companies in America ever qualified to be even considered for EO. So that was really rewarding. I was so proud of the work they did for themselves. And it was really an interesting thing for me to watch, that these people were so determined, but yet so coachable. They knew what they did well, but they were willing to work on things they needed to improve upon, because we all have, strengths and limits. And so from the coaching perspective, by volunteering my time, by speaking on stage, and often when I speak, I talk about the worst day of my life, not the greatest successes, but I don't talk about my greatest hits. I talk about my biggest stumbles that equaled into my greatest growth. That I found that the connections and the relationships and the authenticity, the transparency, the vulnerability that's created in those rooms can be transformative. I just had an experience last week, for example. I was in a room with a dozen other powerful leaders, and first couple of hours I didn't really talk at all, which is not unlike me, but I was taking a lot of notes. But there was patterns I was listening for, and I got very much in a coaching mindset. How can I serve the room? Now, how can I be the center of attention, but how can I serve others? And we're about nearly all done with the first day, and I asked a couple of really clarifying, massively curiosity questions. And the person running the room stopped, and he really listened to absorb. And he must have taken 30 seconds to answer. And his answer changed the rest of the day, changed the next day. And I got so much, and I came up to him afterwards and thanked him. I said, I really appreciate you listening to absorb the question. And I appreciate you not being defensive with the question. And I appreciate you being able to pivot into even more opportunity than maybe you had saw before I asked the question.
Well,
And it was so, and he was so appreciative. He was like, I had a complete blind spot. I didn't even see what you saw was so obvious or so clear. And I think that's, as coaches, what we're able to help people do is put some light on those blind spots with the curiosity. Because I didn't know if my question was the pivot question, but I knew that something didn't feel, with experience and working with you and being a CEO for 25 years, something felt off, and I wanted to get more knowledge about it. Now, he could have answered that question with something that I had a blind spot on. Okay, cool. Versus the leaders who come into the room, the coaches who come into the room, and this is one of the things you coached me about. Don't go in and thinking you have to be the expert.
yes.
You have to have all the answers to everyone's problems. You don't have to have all the answers, and the curriculum will appear in the room. And that was like the moment it all came together for me. Like, it did appear. I was able to add value in a way that I didn't see coming when I arrived at 8 in the morning. It's 4 in the afternoon. And now I'm able to provide the value that is going to help, a dozen people accomplish some massive goals.
Yeah. So David Cooper Ryder, who founded Appreciative Inquiry, has a beautiful quote. He says, "Questions create worlds. Questions create worlds." And I learned about this Appreciative Inquiry, you're going through the exchange community led by John Berghoff. So I've deeply appreciated the power of questions and the choreography of questions. And the most effective coaches don't provide answers. They're experts in providing generative questions. They're experts in providing generative questions that choreograph an unlocking of human potential, an unlocking of individual and collective wisdom that leads to exponential outcomes. And that's actually, the premise of the exchange community. They say we choreograph exponential, we choreograph conversations inspired by questions that lead to exponential outcomes. So I'm curious, Todd, what was that question that you seeded in the room that unlocked something for that leader and for the room as a whole?
Wow. So without breaking confidentiality, because I think as coaches, we have to maintain confidentiality.
Yes.
And into the group was trying to accomplish some goals and objectives. And it was looking at it, putting in processes in place to accomplish those goals. And my question to the leader was twofold. One, if we've tried putting processes in place for several years and they haven't taken, what do we think is going to be different this time if we put processes in place? Would you be open, and could you make space for, what if we trained the leaders who executed the processes? What if we, instead of looking at how to fix the external world of the organization, what if we worked with leveling and upskilling the leaders within the organization so they could execute differently? And would that be a legacy you'd be interested in being part of?
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. So you're leveraging the active learning cycle for the leaders, because as you're going to be training them, you're going to be introducing, again, this is why you're going to introducing them to content and experience, to a certain level of content, that then you're going to be helping them reflect on for their own learning first.
Right.
What actions would it take to actually create a different kind of experience such that ultimately they could deliver a meaningful content experience for others?
Yeah, exactly. And it's very much a heart-centered group of leaders. It's a group of leaders who are servant leader first, and they were just kind of stuck in the weeds. I said, well, let's get to a higher elevation.
Yes.
Let's take a look at how, if we work with the leaders, we upskill the leaders, because it's an organization where the leaders are there for a couple of years and then they move on to different roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
So, but if we start working with the incoming leaders and they move through the system, and in that system they continue to get up leveled, that's really where impact, I thought potentially was an opportunity. And I think sometimes as coaches, as leaders, sometimes the hardest thing is in the room or in a coaching call is to sit with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And to put something out there, and for me at least, to let it sit in the room, because I think naturally we want to jump in and rescue somebody, or we're trained as kids to make a joke or whatever, because it's uncomfortable space in this uncomfortable air. And one of the things, again, one of the greatest gifts I've received from you is being in the moment, sitting in the uncomfortable, acknowledging it, recognizing it, honoring it in some cases, but knowing it's there. And then from that space of that tension, that's where a lot of magic takes place. I know it's certainly for me, but in the moment, I even said to the leader afterwards, I could tell you're a little bit challenged, and there I could see your body reaction. I said, just so you know, if I ever ask you a question like that, I'm never going to leave you unpacked. I'm not going to leave you just to flounder and say, cut, we're done. I will make sure that I ask follow-up questions to you to get you to a place of feeling centered again. And I do that with my coaching clients too, because a lot of the questions that I've been asked by you for over 7 years put me into that space of reflection. And when I think of the word reflection, I think of a mirror. And the questions you're asking me, I'm usually bringing you like, yeah, the outside world is doing this to me. Like, well, but let's reflect on that. What about you? What's your role in that? Where have you shown up? Where haven't you shown up? And that always holds that mirror up to me. And sometimes I can tell you stories for hours about how uncomfortable it made me feel.
Yes.
And to your credit, you never jumped in and rescued me.
Yeah.
And when I work with my clients, I don't jump in and rescue them. But right next to them, if you think about it from a metaphorical standpoint, they're in the quicksand and they're feeling the sinking feeling. Well, as coaches, we're right there on the shore with them. We've got the rope available to them. They've got to be ready to ask for the help, because I think sometimes what happens in coaching relationships, and I've seen this with other coaches, is we want to just fix the problem. So we throw solutions at it, when it really part of the coaching journey, being coached journey as the client, is the uncomfortable growth we have to go through. And if it's easy and it's common and it's pedestrian, the results, I think, are minimized, and it creates more of an artificial harmony relationship with the coach versus, I think, the deep relationship I have with you.
Yeah, so I love this. It's a very important distinction for coaches to realize how, what best serves their clients. And if you put into a hierarchy of what best serves the client is the value of growth or the value of comfort and peace.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's going to structure a certain, temptation. So if you value growth over comfort, what you're going to do is you're going to make space for the discomfort.
Right.
And then if you go into the science of stress, if you think about what is that discomfort, fundamentally what we're talking about is stress. And we've been conditioned to think stress is bad for us. And that's because our common definition of stress is, can I cope? And when we feel we're stressed, we feel like we're not coping very well. And so there's a temptation for coaches to actually deal with the discomfort of stress by helping provide coping strategies around the stress, as opposed to the bigger opportunity. There's a bigger opportunity in the stress. And the bigger opportunity is the reframe that was offered by Alia Crum and Kelly McGonigal in The Upside of Stress. And I think you referenced that in your book as well.
Yes.
And what we've both referenced is them sharing that stress happens when something you care about is at stake.
Yes.
So the issue over here of the discomfort or the stress is, rather than going straight to how do I become less stressed, the better question in reflection is, what do I most care about? What's at stake over here? What am I invested in? And you certainly were uncomfortable when you were in, you were stressed in your relationship with Tyler.
Sure.
And you came to, what's at stake is you realized you were stressed and uncomfortable because of that, because you were invested in the relationship. That really, really mattered to you. And when you think about where people get stressed about their family, their most important relationships, and their business, and so if you focus on the discomfort rather than on what they most care about and allow them to actually engage in asking the better question, what is the outcome that you most care about in this high stakes arena? What is that outcome? Your outcome that you wanted to do with Tyler was you wanted to reconnect with Tyler.
Absolutely.
And then you move understanding that the stress energy, the discomfort is activation, it's energy mobilizing. Stress is now becomes an asset mobilizing energy that can serve your outcomes if you can channel that into action. So what you're saying is, how can I best use this energy of activation, the stress energy of activation that is truly serves me as fuel.
Yes.
To take the smallest steps I can take in alignment with the outcomes that are most meaningful to me here.
Yeah. And when you told me that, I thought there's absolutely, there's just, I remember saying to you, okay, I want a relationship with my son. Here's his phone number. Why don't you give him a call? Send me the bill, whatever it's going to take. And you're like, you literally laughed at me and you said, it doesn't work that way. If you work on you inside out, you show up differently, he'll pick up on that. And you put these small baby steps, and remember some of the baby steps we did, you put them into place, and over time, it will be different. And you didn't tell me exactly how it was going to be different, or that we would have this gigantic kumbaya moment, which we did. But I started showing up differently. Tyler started showing up differently. I'm doing my work. He's doing his work. And as you talk about eloquently in the beginning of the book, it's been transformative for our relationship. So, when we were working together, I'm living in Michigan and Tyler's living in California. Now, as we're recording this in 2021, he lives 15 minutes from me here in Michigan, and I couldn't be happier. And it's been a connecting relationship. It's exceeded anything I could have dreamed of in my darkest days. And the thing that I really appreciate so much is that certainly you've helped me change as an individual, and I love that about it. But I also have my son back. And I remember when you spoke at Eccentric and I did the opening that day, and I'm in the audience telling people the story, and see people in the audience, they're getting tearful. And I think when we speak from vulnerability and authenticity, I think it lands with people. People feel it. But I remember the moderator told me, okay, you're going to go on stage and you're going to exit right. Danny's going to come off the left, and we don't want you guys to collide. Makes sense. And I remember I turned to go that way, and you came around, and it had impacted you. And we had this embrace about how you had, I don't think you really knew the impact as my coach you had made on my family. You had made on me as a father. You'd made on me as a man. And it was such a generous gift that you gave me that opportunity to go in front of your audience that day to share that story. And it's been so crazy since that was 2, 3 years ago. And since then, I'll be at an EO conference or I'll be at an EO event or something like, hey, you're the guy who introduced Dr. Friedland. I'm like, yeah. Oh my gosh. I never got your name, but oh man, it hit me. And I went home and I told my wife about it. Or, it's just such like, I don't, I just want you to know the wake you've left in your work and how we as coaches sometimes don't know how we impact people.
Yeah, well, thank you, Todd. And well, talking about self-coaching, where we started, the first that when you shared with me the purpose of wanting to reconnect with Tyler, that actually we committed to the first part of the content and the curriculum was encouraging a curriculum for you in self-compassion.
Yes. And I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, so it was with you learning to actually soften into your suffering first, that you made space for kindness to emerge from that place, for greater empathy for Tyler's suffering too.
Sure.
And, it's really difficult to feel compassion for anybody else when you're standing on your own neck first.
Right.
So,
Well, yes. Yes.
so in this remaining precious time that we have, I would love you to share a little bit more about your book, the high points about your book. Particularly, what's wonderful about the book and the way you've architected. There's 3 parts to the book, and and in many ways, the book beautifully integrates the active learning cycle,
Right.
because every chapter ends with an active learning cycle. So
It does.
do you want to share more about how the book is structured and what you hope most that the reader will get from it?
Oh, I appreciate the question so much. So what I hope the reader gets from it when they pick up the book is I hope the first thing they get is a sense that they're not alone. I know before we started working together, I had a different coach, and I mentioned him in the book. And he was primarily a business coach. And it was interesting when I shared the book with him before or the release date. He didn't remember 90% of what he coached me because he was so freaked out by how bad the business was and what a mess I was. And I remember telling him I felt so alone. And then I started working with you. And part of the work we started doing was that I would be able to feel less alone. Because an entrepreneur alone, I believe, is an entrepreneur at risk. Yet a lot of the skills that I had as a young person was that I was very self-reliant, and I could conquer Mount Everest without oxygen. I could just, go up there in my swimsuit and get to the top of the mountain. The stories we tell ourselves. So the first thing I got from you, and I want to pass on to the readers, we're not alone in any of the challenges we face, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, leadership, family, marriage, kids. We're not alone. Now, I chose to be alone, but then I've realized there's a lot more people who have a lot more stories similar to mine. We're a lot more alike than we are different. So that's the first thing I'd like the reader to take from the book. The second thing I'd like the reader to recognize and realize is that it's inside out leadership, and that if you want to change your exterior world, you want to create a life by design out here, it starts in here. It starts inside. It starts with, like you talk about, self-compassion, self-coaching. And so the book really starts off with the story we talked about with my son and how you coached me to have self-compassion, how then we put it into the active learning cycle and how we worked through that part of my life. And then I drop in stories of people who had to do very similar things. So the book is really kind of, if you want to look at it from a 30,000 foot view, it's really 2 pieces. It's taking inventory and recognizing where you are, and then putting the active learning cycle into place. That's chapter 4. So we kind of build to that stopping point. And then I put in place, especially for the entrepreneurs who read the book, or the people who are solopreneurs or startups, is action steps you can take to build a better business. But going back to your point, at the end of every chapter, we go back to the active learning cycle. So the active learning cycle is kind of the canopy for the book. And because I found for me, and I found for the coaches, the people that I coach, that's where it always comes back to. It's always, whether it's a problem in your family, whether it's a problem in your relationships with your kids, or whether it's a problem in your business, even if the problem is I don't have enough money to start my company. All those problems for me all start with people. And the person I always found that all my problems started with was the person in the mirror, me. And so how do I pass that message on as I'm coaching people and getting feedback from companies? And one of the leaders I worked with after his first year with me, he made some difficult choices. He made some difficult decisions with his leadership team. He replaced 2 big leaders. Within another year, his revenue grew 70%. His profits grew 500%. But the thing that I love about his story is he says, I've fallen back in love with my business. I really love the impact it makes in the world and in the community. And I'm having so much more fun doing this. And it was getting him to sit in those uncomfortable moments. Well, why would he sit the uncomfortable moments? Because he told himself that nice guys don't fire people. Nice guys don't do this. And he's one of the nicest human beings you could ever meet. Well, once we got him pivoted into some of the other things, his purpose, got him moved into there, and why he was doing what he did. It's amazing the growth he's been able to attain. So I close the book out by I really talk about it, and I use a friend of mine, Nigel Bennett, as kind of the litmus test and the example that you can build a life by design if you really want one, where you can have the family you want, you can have the business you want. It's never work-life balance, it's work-life integration. But there's a way to do it using the active learning cycle about really doubling down on what matters most. And I like the way you said, what matters most to me right now? Well, we can certainly look at that, but also what maybe matters most to you. What legacy do you want to leave? What impact do you want to have? What relationship do you want to have with your children? What relationship do you want to have with your spouse? What relationship do you want to have with your team? I know leaders there's one leader that just they sold a publicly held $600 million company. His number one goal, and you would think it'd be shareholder value because that's what they're training, is his number one goal is I want to make sure all of the key leaders who've driven this business out of the ruins and to the top of the mountain get taken care of, and that they all have jobs, and that to me is that millionaire next door mindset, that conscious capitalism mindset that I think is so still underserved in the community. So if people can read the book, and certainly if you buy it on February 9th, it's $1. It's part of the promo push. I think you'll get value from it. My email address is in there. If you don't get value from it, I'm happy to send you your $1 back. It's okay. And it's just been an absolute, it's been a labor of love. It's taken me 5 years to write the book. Yes. I've gone through, and when you kind of warned me on this time, you're going to go through several different iterations of your book, and it's going to twist and turn like a river. And I think now it's something that I can stand behind. It's something I can be proud of to talk to people about. And it's not for everybody, and that's okay. But if you're somebody who's struggling with fear and self-doubt, if you're struggling with, I feel a little bit alone in the world, where can I go? I include my story. I include stories of other successful entrepreneurs like Brian Scudamore from 1-800-GOT-JUNK, Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank, Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken. For me, it was a chance to kind of get the book out that I wish I would have had when I started my company when I was 27 years old.
Beautiful. It is a joy of joys to see you thriving in your life, to seeing how you've moved, as you say in your language, from success to success. It's and now to see you passing your wisdom on from your self-coaching to actually wanting others to invest with loving care, and from born of your self-compassion with compassion for others around wanting to invest them in their self-coaching so that they can bring greater value to their experiences, their families, their businesses, and the world in which they serve.
Especially during these times, it's been really fascinating to me to work with the leaders that I've worked with during the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, how they've had to pivot their businesses. The leaders who I feel have done the greatest job are the heart-centered leaders. The leaders who've done the job are the ones who will stand up and tell their teams, I see you, I care about you as a human being. And they will have uncomfortable conversations due to uncertainty. What is the business going to look like? What is my What is my community going to look like? What are, dealing with some of those fears and self-doubts? Because the reality is that leadership is a lot of work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. And if we avoid the work as leaders, if we avoid the conversations as leaders, and we avoid the communication as leaders, what happens in my experience is that people will, in the absence of communication, they will fill in that gap with their own narratives. And typically their own narrative is not a positive one. Like, the company's going to close, my boss is going to fire me, what's going to happen? But also in our ability to work with things as coaches and leaders, we have the opportunity to help encourage that leader to change that communication dynamic and change the way they show up. And a lot of that I work with my clients on has been due to the work that you've generously taken this journey on with me.
Yeah. Well, Todd, just to model something, I just want to let you know how much I love and appreciate you.
Yeah. And
And
I love and appreciate you, sir.
yeah, it's just been such a privilege to be in this relationship with you, and it's framed in coaching, but it's a larger frame, and it's the larger frame. It's framed in our human connection beyond any definition. So I just want to say it's been um, the joy of joys to be in this relationship with you.
It's been transformative for me. Um, it's it's truly one of the greatest blessings I've had in the last 10 years of my life. And I'm so appreciative of you. I'm so appreciative of your family supporting you in the work that you do, Sue, Zach, and Dale. And regardless of wherever our journey goes, you and I, that you can have confidence that whatever work I continue to do in coaching is certainly, I'm part of the Danny Friedman coaching tree. They talk about it in the NFL, the Andy Reid coaching tree, the Bill Belichick coaching tree. Your work will live on through the work that I will do for others and the self-coaching I teach to others. So
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. And I'm imagining. I don't have to imagine, but I know and trust um, that Todd and I hope this has served you well.
thank you, sir.